right, here we go. All right, let's see if we can get this working. Can you guys hear me okay? All right. Cool. This seems like fun. All right, I am going to begin with some jokes. Yeah, I'm going to begin with some jokes. My daughter is making me do it. She was originally going to be on here, and she was going to be doing these jokes herself. She chickened out. Don't blame her. And she made me do the jokes for her. So, all right, here we go. Let's see, what's a good one? She was telling me a few on the way over here. Okay, here we go. What do you call a grumpy reindeer? What do you call a grumpy reindeer? According to her, it's a Rudolph. A Rudolph, okay. All right, just warming you up a little bit. Let's see here. All right. What carol do fish sing? We fish you a Merry Christmas. All right. One more, and then we're going to get going. What does Santa do when he has bad breath? What does he do when he has bad breath? He eats ornaments. Okay, that's really rough. All right. So we're going to do this thing and see if it's going to become a thing. Maybe we will do this more often. Often I will record a video doing the podcast for our patrons on Patreon, which, of course, you can join us there if you want to support this podcast. But I just thought, hey, what would it be like if we live stream this thing? Have no idea how it's going to go. I don't even know if it's going to be interesting to you guys. Because if you haven't noticed, an episode is like 30, 40 minutes long. And, yeah, is that fun? Watching somebody read? But, hey, you know, the way I look at it, you can ask some questions along the way. You can, just kind of jump in, and I don't mind pausing because I've already recorded the audio version of this, the nice version of this, so there's no reason to make this perfect. So by all means, let's interact a little bit. If you're on YouTube or on Facebook, on Adventist History Podcast, you can find us in both locations. You can watch in both locations. And so we're going to see how this goes. I think we're going to do this at least one more time in December. We're going to give away some cool stuff for you guys for Christmas, just as a thank you for listening and now watching. And, so we're going to see how this goes. A little bit of context, in case you don't obsess about the content of every episode every single month. But, so how does this go? We talked last time about Judson Washburn. He was an Adventist pastor. He was an evangelist. He was a church planner. He was a lot of things, also a bully, and we talked about his feud with William Warren Prescott and how that went. And we're going to be transitioning into another kind of bully today, one named Adolf. And so just kind of keep that in mind as we go into this. That's kind of what we did in the last lesson. What am I teaching Sabbath school here? The last episode, two episodes ago, we talked about eugenics, Adventists and eugenics, and of course that was probably a better prequel to this particular topic as we begin a 3-part series called The Nazis. Just sounds ominous, right? Nazis are just one of those groups where you can say whatever you want about them and not feel bad, which is probably something we should be thinking about. But anyways, that's kind of the narrative arc that we're on. is talking about how this kind of convergence of parts of Adventism. Doesn't mean that every Adventist believed in eugenics, but it was widely. I don't know if I can say widely. It's hard to say for sure, because eugenics is kind of like racism, where you have some really overt comments that are like, oh yeah, that's it. And then you have like this kind of sub-layer of really subtle things. So of course, eugenics, just to refresh your memory, is this idea that we want to promote good genes in people, which means we don't want them to be polluted with genes from less good stock, which of course we can mean anybody we want. We could mean African Americans, we could mean Jews, we could mean Asians, we could mean anybody we want. But the good genes in the eugenics movement generally meant northern white Europeans, okay? Generally meant northern white Europeans. Those are the genes we want, and those other people, whatever. So, lost me face. Oh no, there I am. So anyways, yeah, that's what's going on, and that segued very nicely into Nazi Germany. Okay, I think we understand that. So, all right, we're going to begin this podcast now, and we're going to see what happens here. All right. So, feel free to ask questions as we go, and I'll be happy to pause and talk with them. We can chat about it at the end. Maybe I'll bring in an Adventist history professional to come in the next time we do this at the end. All right. If a Seventh-day Adventist knows anything about her church and World War II, she knows that it wasn't Adventism's finest hour, was it? Some Adventist leaders in Nazi Germany openly admired Hitler. Worse, some Adventists even alerted the Gestapo to the location of Jews. For 100 years, this is the thing that really gets me. For 100 years, the essence of the Adventist message has been, we need to warn every single human being we come across that a beastly power will rise and compel all people to worship under the penalty of death. During the Civil War, they said this might be the end. We got to be ready to stand. During the time of the Sunday laws in the 1880s, 1890s, and beyond, the Adventists were talking among themselves, saying this could be the end. We have to be prepared to stand. During World War I, Adventists said this could be the end. We have to be prepared to stand. Are you getting the flow of this now? And in hindsight, none of those experiences were anything even close to what it must have been like to live through Nazi Germany. Okay? Civil War was tough, but for Adventists at least, they weathered it pretty easily. They were in the north. They were not going to fight. They secured their right not to fight. They were okay. Sunday laws, there was no actual persecution. World War I wasn't too hard on Americans at home. And it's like in all of those situations, Adventists thought this could be the end. We have to be ready for the end. They would tell everybody they meet, the end could be near. We got to get ready for the end. Then we get to Nazi Germany. And if Nazi Germany wasn't the end of time, then it was a full-scale dress rehearsal, in the sense that everything Adventists ever said about the end of time, it's going to be a time of persecution. The government, the factions in your nation, you're going to unite behind the government and support persecuting religious minorities. The government is going to demand worship. Hitler was a quasi-messianic figure in Germany. And it's like everything we think about the end times as Adventists seem to be fulfilled in a local sense, right? Restricted to Germany and the lands that Germany controlled. And so that was probably a dress rehearsal for Adventists about what the end was going to be like. And we Adventists failed. And we're going to see that not just in this episode, but in the next couple episodes. Adventists failed to meet the challenge in hindsight. But while we're going to talk about Adventism's failure in hindsight, we also have to talk about, we also have to try to understand the time in which they lived and how difficult it was. Okay, so we're going to try to do both things at the same time. All right, now these Adventists, they weren't dumb. They didn't, after the war, they didn't say, well, we had no idea. Not at all. If any group of people should have been able to see what the Nazis were like, should have been able to look past the rhetoric of the Nazis, should have been able to recognize a beast in the fullest sense of that word in Bible prophecy, it should have been Adventists, right? If any people should have, like, from a mile away, been able to look at the language of the Nazis, the violence that seemed to follow in their wake, their ideas about church and state, if any group of people should have been able to spot what this thing is, should have been Adventists, right? Should have been Adventists. Maybe we expect too much. Anyway, so when you stop and think about it, I think, and when you go and listen to the audio version of this, it may not be as clear. So I want to take a time to just kind of clarify this up, because in the audio version of this, I say that the failure of German Adventists to be ready to meet the Nazi apocalypse shatters your self-confidence. If you honestly believe you're ready for the end times as an Adventist, and you look back on that period in Adventist history, that should give you pause. That should give you pause from feeling a little too confident about how ready you are. Okay? And I worry that people who may listen to the audio version of that may listen to that and think that I'm, that readiness is all about, saving food and I guess all of this stuff. That's not what I mean, all right? I mean, you're ready, I think, personally, with faith in Jesus and all of that, and it's not about stockpiling guns and food and all that. Okay, fine, but I'm just taking the faith part out of this. Just kind of mentally being in a place where you're ready for Jesus to come, where you're kind of mentally prepared for challenges, you're ready to brave persecution. They weren't there. They weren't quite ready for it. And it's kind of just dispiriting when you're a group of people who for 90 years at that point have been saying, be ready. Everyone needs to be ready. And you're looking down on other people because they're not living as if Jesus' second coming is near. And you're those guys, you're those girls who go around saying this all the time. And then you get blindsided along with everybody else, almost everybody else, by the Nazis. It's discouraging, I would think. And, you might feel a little bit better by it by saying, all right, you know what? First one's on you, Hitler. Didn't see that coming, but now we're ready. I think the problem with that is that I don't know that Adventists have learned, simply because the church has done a really good job of burying what happened in the 1930s under a pile of, let's say, snow. And I'm not alleging a conspiracy here. I think what happened was the stories that came out of the 1930s and early 1940s from Germany, the stories that the church published and pushed were stories of individual heroes who resisted the Nazis, who hid Jews, who refused to fight in the army and kept Sabbath and all those kind of things. I mean, those are worthy stories to be shared. But those are the ones that got published. The statements about how good Hitler is, we'll read some of them as we go on. Those didn't get published, yeah? And so Adventists didn't really have much of an opportunity to know how badly the church had failed. To put it another way, I guess if I could just frame this for you, because it's really hard to tell a simple story about this, okay? It's not just, well, the church failed, because obviously there were plenty of people who didn't fail. Plenty of heroic stories to come out of this event in human history. And it's really a story of the institutional church failing, and the institutional church is comprised of individuals. It's really a story of the institutional church failing and individual church members succeeding. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. I want to take a glimpse at, next time we do this, we should have some pictures and stuff, right? Maybe a helpful way to understand this is looking at the Adventist Church Apology, which happened in 2005. Church leaders in Germany and Austria took the 60th anniversary of the end of the war in Europe as an opportunity to apologize. I guess 60 years, never too late. And they lamented that in some of our publications, there are found articles glorifying Adolf Hitler and agreeing with the ideology of anti-Semitism in a way that is unbelievable from today's perspective. Now, I don't look. This is a translation into English, so I don't know how faithfully this reflects the original. I don't read German. I assume it was written in German. So I don't want to make too big of a deal about this because I don't know how it reads in German. But I note always, whenever there's an apology, just note the use of the passive tone. In some of our publications, there were found articles. As if, they got slipped in there. We don't really know how. They're just, there were found articles. Like, whenever somebody uses the passive voice in an apology, it generally means they're kind of taking the least amount of responsibility that they can. Again, I don't want to read into that too much. All right, but it's like, if I wanted to apologize for hurting your feelings, I could say, hey, it was my fault. I'm sorry for hurting your feelings. In a more passive voice, I could be like, I'm sorry there were some hurt feelings. I'm sorry somebody hurt your feelings. Okay, that wouldn't be quite the same, but you get the idea. Anyway, so a copy of this apology was sent to Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum in Israel. Go to Yad Vashem if you're ever in Israel. You're going to find the name there at Yad Vashem of Jean Weidner. I don't know if I'm pronouncing all of these words correctly, but I'm going to do my best. He was a Belgian Adventist who set up a humanitarian network which ended up saving 1,000 people from the Nazis, including 800 Jews. He isn't the only Adventist to be honored at Yad Vashem. I found over 20 situations, not just Adventists, 20 situations, sometimes having multiple Adventists in them, where Yad Vashem was honoring Adventists. Probably don't even know all the stories either. Probably was many more. He's not the only one to be considered righteous among the nations. In Hungary, we have an Adventist pastor who saved 15 Jews. In Italy, an Adventist family hid a Jew. In Latvia, 2 sisters were part of a whole community of Adventists who hid Jews. There were dozens of stories of Adventists saving Jewish lives. So Yad Vashem memorialized their names, these people who are righteous among the nations, planted trees in their honor. But, Yad Vashem also has this apology from Adventist church leaders for having supported Hitler. I mean, can you imagine working at Yad Vashem, and on one hand, you have this apology from the church for supporting Hitler, and on the other hand, you see these trees of Adventists who saved Jewish lives. And, do you wonder what's up with the Adventists? What side were they on? What happened in Germany back then that we both get an apology and we celebrate some of them as heroes? It makes you wonder. Now, that's what I wrote in the episode. But at the same time, I mean, I'm going to guess that the people at Yad Vashem are probably used to this. Because as we're going to see in the next episode, Adventists are not the only ones to have this kind of, I guess, split between individual members and their church leaders. All right, so I'm going to guess the people at the museum are not too surprised that this happened in a church, because it happened in most of them. Anyways, so this isn't the story. We're going to frame this correctly. This isn't the story of a small group of Adventists in one country, okay? 10% of all Adventists around the world at that time lived in Germany. And those believers there in Germany found themselves both terrified by the Nazis and attracted to the Nazis. Politically, German Adventists shared the conviction with many of their countrymen that the post-war Weimar Republic was a miserable failure. Okay, they lose World War I. The Allies say, "You guys are done. Form a new democratic government." The Germans do. And it really just went nowhere. It didn't really solve many of the problems that the Germans were facing after the war. They were still dealing with the consequences of the war, up until the time that Hitler was elected. Many of these Germans came up with a theory of what had happened during World War I. You probably have heard of it before. It's the theory that we were stabbed in the back. Stabbed in the back at the end of World War I. Because it was very strange to the Germans, because they kept reading of their victories every day and that they were going to finish the war soon. The German soldiers were in other people's land. So they didn't really see the defeats. They didn't read about them in the paper. And then suddenly our soldiers are coming home with their heads down. And we're being told that we lost the war, right? I mean, that can't be. And in fact, the Chancellor of Germany at the time, when the troops were coming back, he greeted them by saying, "No enemy has vanquished you." Well, that just got the people talking, right? I mean, if no enemy has vanquished us, then why did we lose? If it wasn't an enemy army that did this, maybe we were betrayed by our own politicians. Maybe we were betrayed by the Jews, right? When you lose, a lot of that ugly stuff tends to kind of bubble to the surface. You start looking for people to blame. Of course, the Jews got thrown in there. It's all the Jews as an international conspiracy. And certainly they had a hand in it. Their own political leaders. They blame their own political leaders. And then, of course, they blame the Allies for imposing upon them what felt like a humiliation under the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Okay? German Adventists were still German. And they felt the same humiliation and anger that fueled the rise of the Nazis. Now, Adventists were attracted to Adolf Hitler because they had a sincere appreciation for the Führerprinzip, or leadership principle, that was being talked about after the First World War, especially towards the end of the 1920s. This leader principle simply meant that leaders should have the freedom of absolute control over those that they are responsible for. So if you are a manager at a company, you need to be able to have total control over the people you manage. I don't mean like, yeah, you can torture them or kill them. I mean that, like, you got to be able to have your hands free to make the decisions you need to make in order for your team to be successful. You see, the critique of the Weimar Republic for the Germans was like it was a bureaucratic mess, and that nobody had the full freedom to make a decision that needed to be made, okay? And another example, of course, they applied this to churches as well. If you're a bishop, if you're a pastor, if you're a church administrator, you need to have the freedom to make decisions for the people who are under you. It was a very, autocratic way of looking at power structures. But it appealed to people because Hitler didn't just come along and say, "Hey, I'm the leader, everybody get in line." Hitler said, "I'm the leader of my sphere," which is all of you, "but you are also the leader in your spheres." And, that felt good if you were a church administrator. That felt good if you were a factory owner. That felt good if, you were a manager in an office somewhere. It felt empowering. Now we finally have, they're talking about us having the power, having the freedom we need in order to make the right decisions for our own people. That felt empowering to a people who were sick and tired of being scapegoated by the rest of the world. So no more rule by committees and councils and bureaucracies and congresses and all of that. One German Adventist was on board with this idea in an article titled, this is my rough translation of it, "There is a great shortage of true Führers today. He wrote in 1932, this is just before Hitler was about to get absolute power. He wrote, "A people, a church, a land, a city which has no good Führer is destined for perdition. Moreover, the Adventist church needs good Führers." We need good leaders in our church, like according to this principle. Not just leaders as in leadership in a general sense, but leaders in like people with absolute power. We need that in the church if we're going to get anywhere. Otherwise, as he said, a people, a church, a city, or a land with no good Führer is destined for perdition. Now, it's hard not to see what I think is a biblical parallel here to the time of the judges, right? They look at the Weimar Republic as time of the judges where everybody just does what they think is right. And how long do you want to live in that environment? Like the children of Israel, they asked for a king. And God had warned them, when you ask for a king, the king is going to oppress you, he's going to take things from you, that sort of stuff. And they said, we don't care, we want a king. So maybe they could relate a little bit, right? We're tired of living in this Weimar Republic. We want some certainty, we want stability, and, we need strong leadership in this country. In the Weimar Republic, the Germans were told to pay 100,000 tons of gold to the Allies in war reparations, okay? And this is at a time of a catastrophic, I don't know if it was a recession or a depression for the Germans, right? But the 20s were good for America, but Germany, they were terrible. You had children who were starving, parents who couldn't afford to feed their own children, and yet they kept hearing about the 100,000 tons of gold that the Allies were demanding from them. Now, the Allies would slowly lower the amount that they owed. And Germany, by the way, did finish paying off its World War I reparations. I want to say 2010, 2012, something like that. Their payments got frozen during the Cold War until Germany was united again, and then they resumed making payments, and they paid it off. So 100 years later, they're debt-free, in that sense at least. Anyways, right, so I want you guys to get in their heads. The country is a mess. Your husband's unemployed. You're having a hard time feeding your kids. Radical groups of communists or anarchists or whatever are roaming the streets while the government virtually does nothing. And in hindsight, it's easy to see how they develop this desire for the Führer, this desire for strong leadership, this desire for a political messiah. Yeah, we know how it all blew up in their faces, okay? But I think we have to understand where this desire came from. Sometimes I wish I could go back and just have a conversation with those Adventists about George Butler. Remember that General Conference president? Took over for James White, 1870s and beyond. How he wanted to run the Adventist church like a well-disciplined army. That seems to be that Butler embodied that Führer principle. Right? We need strong leadership who's going to bring everybody else in line. It's your job. If I'm General Conference president, it's your job to get in line. All right. Ellen White had something to say about that. She said, "The Church of Christ is in constant peril. Satan is seeking to destroy the people of God, and one man's judgment is not sufficient to be trusted." Okay, so she's fighting against this idea. And so I kind of wish I could take that, just bundle up the whole Butler story and Ellen White's response to it and just kind of bring it to the Germans in the early 1930s and just be like, hey, we've actually kind of dealt with this before. I don't know. Would they find that persuasive? I don't know. The Adventist church needs good Führers. Well, when you look back, or I should say when you kind of step back, get some perspective on this situation, you realize how much of a bubble German Adventists lived in. But to them, of course, everybody else lived in a bubble. Isn't that how it works? I mean, the world looked on the Germans like, what are they doing? And they're creating a mess over there. And of course, the Germans looked at the rest of the world like, why are you conspiring against us? But really, though, in hindsight, the Germans were in a bubble. And Adventist papers from around the world delighted in taking rhetorical shots at the Nazis. One article out of India smirked that Germany seems to be a good place to stay away from. I love that. I love that because it's so, I don't know. I find it to be mildly clever because you kind of expect him to say something like, Germany seems to be a great place to visit. But instead he's like, Germany seems to be a great place, a good place to just stay away from right now. And so you see a kind of a mixture of horror, I guess, by Adventists around the world, and it's very much like what everybody else felt, who are not Adventist. A sense of horror at the Nazis, but also a sense of amusement, like almost as if the Nazis in their rhetoric was so evil, like they were trying to be a villain. Let's just put it that way. They were trying to be a villain in one of those Disney movies that was going on in the 1930s. And so it's like, it was taken seriously, but it was also mocked. And that's how Adventists felt outside of Germany. They thought Hitler was going to lead Germany to war. Adventists in Germany thought Hitler only wanted peace, that he was misunderstood, that the foreign press was deliberately slandering Germany with fake news. I hate that phrase, fake news, because it just seems to be so politically charged today, but it actually is a really useful phrase. So anyways, hopefully it can lose its political charge and we can just use it dispassionately. Anyways, so yeah, I mean, I think those outside of Germany had good insight into what was going on in Germany. In some ways, they saw much more clearly than the German Adventists did what was going on, what Hitler was all about, where this road was going to lead. But on the other hand, there were other ways in which those outside of Germany didn't really understand what they were talking about because they didn't live through the Weimar Republic. And so this Adventist in Australia wrote, in Germany, Hitlerism is destroying every democratic right of the people. Even the members of the cabinet must obey Hitler's orders or face arrest. He forced through the Reichstag an enabling act which secured him dictatorial powers for 4 years. Okay, so like they're just kind of rehashing this news about Germany as if it's a bad thing, right? Hitler's becoming a dictator. He's restricting people's rights. He's taking on emergency powers. These are not good things, like red light, warning, 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 warning. And, I mean, if you're a German Adventist, it's not that stuff is untrue, although they would probably take issue with some of it. It's just that it misses the point, because for the German Adventists and the other Germans, it was necessary for Hitler to take power because the problem of the Weimar Republic is that nobody had enough power to do anything. They didn't have the will to act. And so it's like, of course Hitler needs new power. You look at that as a sinister thing. We look at that as a good thing. And we think that you are afraid of Hitler getting power, not because you fear war, right? Hitler doesn't want war. We think you're afraid of Hitler getting power because that challenges your own power that you have over us, right? So this is the way that they're thinking about this. This is the way that they're thinking about this. Well, it's interesting that we have this polarized environment back then, where one side sees things so black and white and the other side sees things so white and black. It's a conspiracy. The rest of the world, the globalists, are trying to keep their boot on our neck. And the other side is saying, guys, Hitler is crazy. He's going to lead us to war, right? And it's like, how do you have a conversation between these two groups? If you had an Adventist in Germany and an Adventist in America, like, how do you sit them down and have a conversation about this? I don't know. We're going to talk about a really interesting story in the next episode of an Adventist Nazi who did go to America and started speaking around the country, and just the embarrassment this causes the church in America. But it doesn't seem like anybody stepped up to say we should talk about where you're coming from. Like there was no kind of common ground. We have a really interesting story, though, now, and that's when Arthur Maxwell, our old friend, Uncle Arthur, he was editing The Present Truth in the UK. He visited Germany in 1933 after Hitler had gotten these emergency powers. And he wrote, "My first impression, taking the train across the German frontier, was one of tragedy." Why? Why does Arthur Maxwell think his first impression of Germany was one of tragedy? Because, he said, Nazi swastikas were flying at half-mast from every farmhouse and village that he passed. So Maxwell wondered if Hitler had died, and finally summoning the courage to ask a Nazi officer, right? Can you imagine being in this country and you see all these flags at half-mast and you don't know what's going on? So you ask an officer, why are all your Nazi flags at half-mast? And the officer replies in broken English, he says, "Don't you know today is the anniversary of the Treaty of Versailles?" Like the Nazis were mourning the Treaty of Versailles. And Maxwell's response was telling. Like it's really interesting. He writes, "I felt crushed. What could I say? After a most awkward silence, I retired to my compartment." Now, he doesn't spell this out here. Maxwell doesn't spell this out here. I kind of wish that he would. My guess as to why he felt crushed is perhaps because, of course, being an Englishman, he looks at the Treaty of Versailles as perhaps a just punishment on a foe that started a world war. Right? And he gets to visit that old foe, and he sees that these people are mourning the Treaty of Versailles as if a national tragedy has happened. And maybe that gets Maxwell thinking, oh, goodness, we don't look at this the same way. We won, they lost, we were right, they were wrong, but they don't see it that way. They see that they have been unjustly punished. And that does not bode well for the future, does it? Again, I'm just trying to get into Maxwell's head here. I'm not sure exactly what he was thinking, but that would be my best guess. My best guess. He goes on, Maxwell does. He gets to Berlin. He visits a Nazi protest of the Versailles Treaty. Big rally in Berlin. He says, "Never have I seen a crowd of such dimensions. Hour after hour, processions headed by bands bearing aloft the Nazi colors streamed in from all quarters of Berlin. There must have been at least 500,000 persons present and probably many more." Now, people who are not used to large crowds are usually really bad at guessing how many people are there. But even if he's remotely correct, 500,000 people in 1933, that's a lot of people to be gathering in one city. That would be a lot of people today when, at least in terms of America, where the national population is just so much larger than it was in 1933. That's a lot of people to gather. And so Maxwell sees these crowds holding signs like "Down with Versailles" and "We want freedom," and "Germany is not an blank state," where blank would be the N-word. Maxwell noticed at another rally, this time with only 5,000 in attendance, this is another town, that the crowd maintained perfect order. No one was smoking, no one's littering, nobody's trashing the place, right? They're angry with purpose, but they're not like, let's blow up the world around us. And it's a little bit haunting, I guess. Like, when you have a large group of people who are so angry but so well disciplined. And I would imagine that's terrifying. So Maxwell's guide, his interpreter, whispers to him, it's kind of like, what's going on here? And Maxwell's guide whispers, "It's the new order." Oh, boy. That doesn't sound good, right? It's the New Order. So Maxwell visits a museum. And in it, he saw beautiful maps that looked like the Risk game board. I don't know how else to describe it to you, okay? It's like a flat-looking map. I really got to get pictures next time I do this. Looks like a flat game map, and on it are like standing soldiers and little artillery pieces and tanks and planes, okay? And all those soldiers and tanks and planes and stuff are standing on the nations surrounding Germany. And they're all pointing their guns, pointing their muzzles at Germany. And, of course, how many tanks and planes and soldiers are in Germany on this map? None. Because the whole point of this, Maxwell calls it a modern museum. And the whole point of this, he recognizes it for what it is. Maxwell recognizes it for what it is. It's a propaganda museum. It's a war propaganda museum. And the whole point of it is to show Germany vulnerable, is to show how armed to the teeth the nations around Germany are. And it's really interesting because when you're outside of Germany at this time, what is everybody talking about? They're talking about Germany's rearmament. And Germany, I guess, is like coming to this conversation saying, well, you're talking about our rearmament. They don't mention that at all on the maps, right? They don't show what they have. What about your guys' arms? So Germany wants to frame the conversation happening around the world. It's not just about us rearming. You can't just talk about us rearming. Oh, Germany got a big ship. Oh, no, be scared. Oh, no, Germany got more soldiers. The Weimar Republic limited them to 100,000 soldiers. They blew past that. And that seemed like a terrifying thing to other nations. But Germany's like, yeah, but look how many soldiers you guys have. We're just trying to have enough to defend ourselves. That was their rationale. And Maxwell, if he was expecting to come down to the bottom of it, if he was expecting to get the truth of what was really going on in Germany, he didn't. Because he quotes Pilate at the end of his article and says, "What is truth? What is truth? I don't know. I'm here in Germany. I'm interviewing everyday Germans. He interviewed Nazi officers. He's trying to figure out what's going on in Germany, what the truth of it is. And he walks away like, I don't know. I don't know what's going on here. It's hard to say." And I think this atmosphere of confusion was the point. Maxwell attended a Nazi meeting about the unification of the churches. Okay, so to an Adventist, hey, what are you talking about unifying the churches? Because we're a small fish in this pond. We're going to get rolled up into a bigger church. That's not good. Excuse me. That's not good news for us. Sounds ominous. But no one there could answer questions about what this new unification of the church plan was. A Nazi leader gave a speech on the importance of the Bible that, in Maxwell's opinion, could have been preached by any evangelical minister. The Nazi said the churches have not recognized God's great hour, and that's why pastors are speaking to empty churches, right? Like they're not giving present truth. Maxwell thought that was the best line in the whole speech. But then the Nazi also said that Hitler was a savior sent from God and who had arrived 1 minute before midnight. And Maxwell was not as happy with that. Because, Maxwell's not going to be happy with anybody as a political messiah. But also, the kind of eschatological view of Hitler, like he's arrived one minute before midnight. Coming a minute before midnight, that's how Adventists saw themselves, right? We've got this three angels message. We got to warn the world before it's too late. Well, anyways, Maxwell then went to Nazi party offices, asked point blank, what exactly are Hitler's goals? He was told Hitler wants to fight corruption. Hitler wants to help the poor. Hitler wants to unify Germany. And that sounded fine to Maxwell, right? That's good goals. That should be everybody's goals. well, maybe not everybody should try to unify Germany, but you know what I mean, right? You want to see our people united. You want to help the poor, fight corruption. But, Maxwell also had heard stories of Jews being harassed, violence being standard fare for the Nazis. That does not sound good. And it's like, I think this was the whole point, wasn't it? This was the whole point. You create this atmosphere of confusion, but it's not a paralyzing confusion. It's not a confusion where Germans are walking around like, we don't know what to do here. It's like a confusion where it helps polarize people. I don't know how else to put it, because Hitler was a very decisive, blunt, bold person, okay? Very, very much so. Nobody could say, well, Hitler has weak opinions. Hitler had very, very strong, tough opinions. And yet, at the same time, when you really sit down and think about it, what exactly did Hitler believe? He said early on in his career that the Jews are a disease, but he also insisted that he didn't want to hurt any Jews. He just didn't want them to have control over Germany's destiny. So it's like, how do you understand that? How do you understand? It was a constant process of Hitler or one of his lieutenants saying something just attention-grabbing, shocking, brutal, and then when somebody wanted clarity on that, the appropriate ministry of the party would say, oh, actually, what he means is this, and it would always be something that's like not nearly as extreme, not nearly as objectionable. So it was this constant game. Let me give you an example. All right, Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf that the political Führer should leave religion alone. Okay? The head of state should leave religion alone. Adventists could cheer at that. Separation of church and state. Good. The Nazi 25-point program declared that we demand freedom of religion for all religious denominations so long as they do not endanger its existence or oppose the moral sense of the Germanic race. I guess we could agree to that. That religious liberty is not infinite. If your religion is to go killing people, there's a line we draw with religious liberty, I guess is what I mean. At the same time, what does it mean to oppose the moral sense of the Germanic race, right? That's a vague term. Like, it's something you read and you're like, yeah, it shouldn't be immoral. Your religion shouldn't be immoral. It shouldn't really just, anyways, you get what I'm saying? And so you would agree to that statement on the face of it. But when you really think about it and try to figure out exactly what does that mean, it becomes a lot foggier, I guess is what I mean. And the statement, that point number 24, the Nazi 25-point program, it said that the party would advocate positive Christianity. I guess if you had to guess what that meant, you would probably say something like it meant Christianity that, makes a positive difference in the world, Christianity that is hopeful, uplifting. I don't know, right? This is part of the problem. What is positive Christianity? And you can imagine that this was the point. Like, what exactly is your policy of religious liberty here? Because on one hand, you say that the leader should not interfere with religion, with the churches. On the other hand, you say that separation will exist as long as they don't endanger its existence, like the state's existence. Fine, it's not a revolutionary political party masquerading as a religion, or opposes the moral sense of the Germanic race, and that also has to be positive Christianity. But I don't know what any of that means, right? Like, practically speaking, what does any of that mean? And they never wanted to define it. It's a statement that most people could agree to when they read it. Yes, it should not, religion should not be hostile to the state trying to take over. We all can agree to that. Religion should not be something that offends people's moral sensibilities, I guess, offends the race. Maybe I wouldn't have worded it like that today, but I mean, yeah, I guess in a sense we can all agree with that. But what exactly did it mean? And this ambiguity allowed the Nazis to apply an interpretation to these principles on a case-by-case basis. So if you do X, you may find yourself in trouble of offending these sensibilities. If you do Y, you're okay. But if you do Z, yep, you've offended the sensibilities again. And it's like you never knew. There's no like definition of that. You just never knew. One day, one Nazi ministry could be after you. The next day, you could do the same thing, and then another Nazi ministry would be okay with it. And this is how it kind of affected the Adventist church. In 1933, when Hitler took power, in November of that year, Adventists were banned. The Adventist church was banned for no warning, no explanation. And the Adventists started getting worried, like, why are we banned? What did we do? We didn't do anything. And 2 weeks later, they were unbanned. They had gotten the lawyer. They were unbanned. No explanation given. So, okay, whew. I mean, we could have had all of our property seized, our offices searched. I mean, that's a big deal to have all of your property taken away from you, all of your churches, all of your offices. We see that again, 1935. The Nazis announced the closure of every Adventist church in Prussia. Again, they never gave a reason. The denomination scrambled. They brought in William Spicy Spicer over to sort it out. He couldn't get a straight answer from anyone in Berlin. Adventists expected the worst. But a few days later, the order to close all the churches in Prussia just disappeared, like it never happened. I mean, just imagine if you're a church administrator. Maybe that's too hard. Imagine, just that you're a homeowner, and you get a letter from the government saying, "Hey, you are now banned. And we're going to seize your house." And you're like, well, crud, I got to start hiding valuable things. I need to find another place to live. What am I going to do with this couch? I just don't want the government to take it and keep it all. Like you're making these plans. You're kind of like mentally saying, well, this is unfair. I need to get a lawyer and fight it. What are my rights in this case? I don't know. And then just like a few days later, it's never mine. And it's like, but it puts you through this kind of moral turmoil, this moral torture, trying to sort out what the implications are of this. And the Nazis just did that time and time again, not just to Adventists, but to everybody. They loved keeping people on their toes. And I'm guessing the reason for it is that if you're in a constant state of anxiety, if you don't know what your rights are before the law, then this politics of chaos means that you're always going to be anxious to please, always anxious to prove your loyalty to the state, always, wanting to comply, because it's like you have no ground to stand on. You don't know where you're standing. And while Adventists did maintain the core of their doctrine during this time, they also accommodated the Nazis at the edges where they felt like they could. Okay? Case in point, that Adventist Sabbath thing seems a bit, dare we say, Jewish. So the church changed the name of Sabbath school to Bible school, and then they started calling Sabbath Rest Day. Adventist literature evangelists stopped selling, some of them did. They stopped selling Great Controversy, felt that could offend the Nazis. Too much stuff maybe about autocratic rulers, I don't know. They did, of course, they kept selling Steps to Christ and books like that, but they also sold a Nazi magazine that was put out by the Race Political Office on health. And I think they could probably argue, like, well, these weren't big compromises. These were just little things. We still kept Sabbath, even if we called it Rest Day. These are just little compromises that we can make safely, right? Now, there's a number of reasons why Adventists liked Hitler, but I want to start by saying that not all Adventists liked Hitler. Adventist church in Germany was actually shrinking during the 1930s, and no doubt many of them saw the blatant Nazi paganism, hateful rhetoric for what it was. They defended the Sabbath. They fought to be exempted from any work on it, and many Adventists initially refused to salute the swastika or greet people with the Hitler salute, the Hail Hitler thing. But church leadership really just slammed the door on any individual members who wanted to criticize the regime. I mean, this was the new reality that the church lived in, and they just couldn't have some Adventist church member, some Beavis out there, making a dumb joke about Hitler's hair or mustache to the wrong person, and you never knew who the wrong person was, right? You could be making that joke to your neighbor. You could be making it to the butcher. You never know who was going to inform on you. And so church administration, the way they looked at it was like, man, we just can't leave our members up to make some ill-advised comment that's going to get all of us in trouble. It's going to get all of our property seized. That's going to get a bunch of us thrown in camps and arrested, right? We can't let our members do that. So they came down and they said, look, you salute the swastika, you give the Hitler greeting. There's nothing in the Bible that says you shouldn't do either of those things, okay? So just go with it. This is the world we live in now. One union president said, don't do or say anything that could be damaging to us. And that union president also said, don't look for the time of martyrdom. Now, we know that there are some Adventists who resisted and hated the Nazis, okay? But between the pressure from the Nazis and their own church leadership, they kept their mouths shut. Now, as I said, many Adventists did like Hitler. They liked that Hitler embodied that Führerprinzip, which they thought would make Germany stronger, but they had other reasons to like where Germany was going under Hitler. They were patriots. Not New England patriots, the better kind. They were sick of being a weak country. They were sick of huge numbers of unemployment. And upon Hitler's election, one Adventist editor wrote, we have just experienced it, to be saved from a hopeless sinking in the last minute, when God sent our land a Führer who took strong command of the controls of the ship of state. I'm sure none of these comments will ever come back to haunt any of you guys, right? There are dozens of statements like this, looking at Hitler as a kind of political savior of their nation. Adventist presses defended the Anschluss, the reunion with Austria. They defended Hitler as he annexed Czechoslovakia, saying that Germany only wanted peace, and Hitler was just trying to grab German communities that had been taken from Germany in the surrounding nations. Now, you can tell that Adventists had bought into the Nazi narrative when they wrote things like, nations bristling with arms surround our fatherland, and not with the most peace-loving designs, even though Germany is disarmed. That was maybe debatable. They do not want to believe its peaceful intentions. I call on every Adventist who loves his people to support the peaceful intentions of the Reich government on 12 November. In other words, this Adventist administrator was writing this letter to Adventist churches. He wanted it to be read on Sabbath, urging them to vote more powers at the next plebiscite, vote more powers to the Nazi government. It is your duty. I mean, can you imagine in America or Australia or England or wherever it is you're watching from, your country, particularly if it's a Western country, can you imagine if your union president sent you a letter saying, read this in church. This is the way you should vote. Oh, boy. Second, Adventist shared some values with Hitler. One Adventist wrote that as an anti-alcoholic, non-smoker, and a vegetarian, Hitler is closer to our own view of health reform than anyone else. This is a problem. That writer isn't wrong, I guess, about that. But we have this tendency sometimes, as Adventists to take a couple of lenses and evaluate somebody based on how they score in those categories. I mean, I don't care if Hitler was positively jacked, if he was like a personal trainer in great shape. Maybe there are some other things about him that might counteract his emphasis on healthful living. All right, but anyways, yes, this was an Adventist value. Adventists also had some ideological beliefs that they shared with the Nazis. I mean, Adventists around the world have been fighting against modernism and communism and atheism and those isms. And, of course, the Nazis were fighting against globalism and communism and atheism and all that as well, at least, rhetorically. Of course, Adventists outside of Germany were also against communism and modernism and atheism, but they also tended to add Nazism to that list as well. So this young Nazi movement, with its emphasis on traditional family values and organic food, its abhorrence of cultural corruption. Well, I mean, that sounds pretty good to an Adventist, doesn't it? Many Adventists also saw Hitler as a Christian, or at least like an ally to a Christian, like a Cyrus. And even into 1940, Adventists were celebrating Hitler's birthday by saying things like that they were celebrating the unshakable faith of Adolf Hitler. Conference president said that the Christian rejoices that his country is in the hands of a man who has received his office from the hands of God. When Hitler assumed emergency powers, an Adventist youth magazine crooned that a fresh, enlivening, and renewing Reformation spirit is blowing through our German lands. The word of God and Christianity shall be restored to a place of honor. Of course, some of those values concern eugenics, right, and the need to purify the German race of polluted people. So Adventists and the Nazis had some things in common. All right. Finally, Adventists liked Hitler, here we go, because of their obsession with the Roman Catholic Church. Oh boy, I'm going to get in some trouble here, aren't I? Okay. All right. Well, Hitler saw the Catholic Church not on theological grounds, but as a political rival. So, that kind of made him an ally to Adventists, right? Now, if you know about Adventists or have been listening to this podcast long enough, you know that Adventists believe that the Roman Catholic Church is a the sea beast, shall we say, of Bible prophecy. And this is a big deal. Because, sorry guys, had to fix something there real quick. All right. This is a big deal because Adventists expected Catholics to push a Sunday law. Like at any time. And that this Sunday law would compel the whole world to shun the Sabbath and persecute Adventists around the world. No. And what we find when we read these articles by German Adventists back then is that German Adventists were so fixated on Catholic plots and conspiracies, I don't know what else to call them, okay, that they couldn't see the Nazis for what they were, which is beastly, eschatologically beastly in every conceivable way. It would be funny if it wasn't so tragic, right? So many people's lives hadn't been lost because of it. Adventists preached about a political power that would compel the whole world to worship a false god, and if you didn't worship the way that this power wanted, then you cannot buy or sell, and this power would also kill you. Adventists preached this, and then they thanked God the Nazis were in power to prevent the Catholics from becoming the beast. Can you believe that? Well, I just don't know. You have one example of an Adventist religious liberty magazine called Church and State kept publishing articles against Sunday laws. And they did this as Jewish shops were being burned, Jewish families being kidnapped. Their sole religious liberty concern was about what the Catholics might do with the Sunday law, while Jews were disappearing. In other Adventist magazines, sometimes over half of the articles were aimed at Catholics. And it's just like you want to pop in just for a moment and just say, I don't think Catholics are your biggest concern right now, guys. From a religious liberty standpoint, from end-time events standpoint. And it ended up being a huge embarrassment for the church because 3 years after the war, 1948, the United States Army had to ask the Adventist church to kick former Nazis out of its church leadership. Major Thompson of the American military government in Germany told the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists that their church was one of the very few in Berlin which have not cleaned house politically to date. Most of the denominations finished this task long ago to have forgotten about it. Major Thompson then told the Adventists to be more like the Catholics, who didn't have to kick many Nazis out of their churches because Nazis weren't welcome to begin with. Ouch! I mean, back in 1929, we see this mentality just kind of setting up the churches, I think, for failure in this point. 1929, Adventists criticized the Weimar Republic for tolerating Catholic politicians. Shouldn't allow them to be in politics, Adventists thought. They wrote, "The priest, today party chairman, tomorrow chancellor of Germany. This is the outcome of 10 years of German Republic. Germany may become a province of the Papal States." I mean, no, there was really no danger of that ever happening since Martin Luther. But right, this is where the Adventists, this is where they're looking. This is where they have their eye on the ball. An Adventist magazine even reprinted this gem. This was originally written by a non-Adventist, but republished in an Adventist paper. For the sad situation of Germany since November 1918, we can thank Jews and Jesuits. The Jesuits are no less dangerous enemies than the Jews. And here's where I said something in the episode, in the audio episode, that probably is going to get me in some trouble with some listeners. So if those listeners are also watching this, let me explain a little bit. What I said in the episode was, is it possible that decades of believing Jesuit conspiracies helped Adventists embrace the Jewish conspiracies being peddled by the Nazis? I mean, if you already believe that the Jesuits are pulling the strings behind the scenes, if you already believe that, is it so hard to just add Jews to the list? It's now Jews and Jesuits pulling strings. And it's gonna get me in trouble because I think, I don't know, people are gonna think I'm down on Adventist prophecy or whatever. But I think Adventists don't often realize that there's no Adventist belief that has anything to do with the Jesuits in the book of Revelation or Daniel. Sure, Adventists see the Catholic Church as as the sea beast that's going to lead an end time, I don't know how to put it, alliance, I guess, of the nations of the earth. Okay. But what does that got to do with the Jesuits specifically? It doesn't say anything about the Jesuits in the 1800s or Jesuits in the 1900s pulling strings. And it certainly doesn't say anything about the Jews doing this. So, I mean, I think Adventists have gotten by with this Jesuit conspiracy stuff. I don't know that it always, I don't know, it's as harmful. But at the same time, we see, I think, in this as an example of how one prejudice that may not be, one conspiracy that may not be, it may be slander or whatever, but it's not, no one's getting hurt, I guess, physically harmed. How one leads to the other, and it leads to another where people actually are getting physically harmed. So, anyways, that was only my point. You may still disagree with me, but, those Adventists are wrong. Now, curiously, Adventists outside of Germany, and I keep kind of going back and forth between Germany and then the Adventists outside of Germany, they opposed Nazism for the same reason that Adventists in Germany supported Nazism, which is anti-Catholicism. So B.G. Wilkinson, conservative Adventist, right, King James only guy, he wrote that fascism is Catholicism, absolutely Catholic. So it's really interesting because the Adventists in Germany are like, yeah, we support Hitler because he's against the Catholics. And the Adventists outside of Germany are like, we're against Hitler because fascism is Catholicism. They really got to get their story straight on that one, huh? And so anyways, just to conclude, Nazi flags began to be part of the Sabbath worship experience. for Adventists in Germany, church leaders told pastors to promote loyalty to the government at every church they visited, and the General Conference decided not to print any more books that were critical of the Nazis, because we don't want to make it hard on our brothers and sisters there in Germany. And so the Adventist church was determined to survive. But I think this is the question we ended the episode with. Survive at what cost? That's the question. That's the question. So anyways, that's where we're going to leave it today. I think we've been going for like an hour and 20 minutes. That's a pretty good amount of time. That's the setup, I guess, for this 3-part arc about Adventists and Nazi Germany. And my goals, I think, as I've studied this and I've read an awful lot leading up to this episode and the next few, my goals in this is to say, basically, Adventists failed in Germany in an organizational sense, but also to kind of push back on people who are going to be really quick critics of that failure, because I do think it's, the Adventist prophetic scenario of surviving a tribulation at the end of time until Jesus comes, it doesn't push you to take social action against unjust regimes necessarily, right? You're not called to defeat the beast in the last days. You're not called to protest the beast in the last days. You're just called to, well, in the words of Revelation, he who endures to the end will be saved. You're called to endure. And so I think we look back on the church during the time of the Nazis and we're like, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you do something? Why didn't you organize a protest? Why didn't you join the confessing church, right? Bonhoeffer, in fighting the Nazis. And I mean, I think it's like, but why? Why would they? Are we expecting more of them than is reasonable? Is social action really just something we see as coming out of the 50s and 60s, like a possibility that comes out of those decades that we wouldn't and shouldn't reasonably expect Adventists to have done in the 1930s? Nothing in Adventist eschatology I shouldn't say nothing, but the way it was understood then, there's nothing in that Adventist traditional belief that would have encouraged them to defy the government. Now, no doubt, I think if the Nazis had said, don't keep Sabbath, don't read the Bible, I really do think Adventists there would have, I don't know specifically how they would react, but I think they wouldn't have just rolled over. They may have went into hiding or something, okay? So I do have faith in them, that they sincerely were trying to uphold the essentials while bending where they felt that they could bend. We just may disagree on and where that place is that they should be bending. But anyway, so it's kind of like I want to generate some empathy for what it must have been like to be alive back then. I want you guys to understand a little bit better of why they made the choices they made, and then also I hope we can learn from this as people, as human beings, as Christians, and realize, okay, that wasn't the best way to go about that, right? Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's where we're going to leave it for today. I appreciate you guys watching. Look forward to doing this again in December. This should be fun. We'll do it one more time, and if nobody cares, we'll just leave it like this. We had a lot of fun. And anyways, hope you guys have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day.